Yeah. So let me make sure we live on Facebook. Okay, it looks like we're live on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping we're live on YouTube as well. But Facebook is where most of the family is, so you know what I
All
mean.
right, no problem.
Yes, Facebook. So yeah, peace and love to the family. You know, Tene Mari, as my brother
All right,
Shakara would, give his introductions. You know what I
yes, sir.
mean? First of all, I would just like to say why we don't celebrate Father's Day per se like that. We still give thanks for those black fathers who are trying to hold the fort even within the African American community. You know what I
Yes, sir.
mean? Even in the West, the diaspora, we kind of losing that fatherly figure amongst ourselves, perhaps taking on to another's culture, too
Mm,
much. You know what I
mm.
mean? So I want to give thanks and more strength and big up all black fathers that are pulling their weight. Um, and the world needs more of us, family. You know what I mean? And those of us who are not yet fathers, I mean, what are you waiting for? You have to breed, man. Breed, and you know what I mean? We have a nation to build. So we have to breed, get the right education, get the
Yes, sir.
right knowledge, to pass over to the upcoming generation so that they now will be the ones to change the world and shape the world how we basically will see fit from an African world view.
That's right.
So in so doing, today is also Juneteenth, as some will
Yeah.
call it, where even quarter of a million slaves were actually emancipated by executive decree today. But I
Mm-hmm.
often ask myself, I wonder, was it Gordon Granger, that made that possible, or was it the constant slave revolts and the rebellions, perhaps costing these individuals too much money, too much
Yes, sir.
money in so we give thanks for the ancestors for even fighting from that time till now, where we even get, black activists like my brother Shakara, who is here with us. Now,
Mm-hmm.
mind you, family, this Juneteenth happened, right? 1965, right?
Mm-hmm.
And mind
No,
you, at that
18,
time,
1865, 1865, 18.
1865, pardon me. And
Mm-hmm.
at that time, family, we were basically just coming out of slavery. And I'm talking about physical chattel slavery. um, when the executive order was given, we were just given our freedom and just let loose.
Mm.
No direction, no counseling, because as a family know, if you're just coming from war or what have you, any drastic change in environment, you will need counseling before you become really part of that society. And we as black people didn't have that. You know
Mm.
what I mean? So a lot of us are still a broken people trying to find our way back home and trying to find our essence. In so doing, it wasn't just about what 24 years after Juneteenth that we have the greatest prophet who ever lived, as they would call him, born. August
Mm.
17th, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and we have
Mm.
thanks for the honorable ancestor. You know, and
Mm.
while the brother, did have print trees, he had the shipping company, the fraternal organization, the UNIA, globally, worldwide. The brother was still about his spiritual practices, because even in one of the books I have of the brother,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Life and Lessons, which I did put as a source to a post that Shakara did on Facebook.
Yeah.
But then he actually showed me that excerpt from that book, that lesson 5, actually came from some
Yeah.
other material. You know what I mean? But the brother is a Marcus. The brother is a Gaviite. So I give thanks even for the knowledge and the wisdom, and even to be in the presence of this Pan Africanist and
Yes,
and
sir.
black activist brother.
Yes. Yes.
I came across you, brother, on Titans TV with Callum L. Big up Titans
Okay.
TV, L straight
Bless,
up.
bless, bless,
Yeah,
bless, bless.
about 6 months ago, and it was in regards to a presentation you did, and you didn't touch on some things in the presentation, so you decided to touch upon it in a show you did with Callum L, and that was basically African expressions and African influences
Mm-hmm.
within Judeo-Christian narrative and conceptualizations. That was just beautiful. That just opened my mind to another level.
Give thanks.
And I have a brother of mine, brother Walter, not I mean by flesh and blood, but
Mm-hmm.
brother Walter, and I told him, bro, we need to start studying Shakara's work, you know. You know what I mean? And it wasn't probably about 2 months ago that we started to hit up your videos, you
Okay,
know.
okay.
So I give thanks for what man has learned, and it is an honor and a pleasure to even have you having this build with us. So
Yes, sir.
welcome, brother. Ten name
Yes.
Mawe, all thanks unto the creative.
Tendai Wale giving thanks. Abibi Fahodie, African liberation for all African people. And yes, as you just explained, the word sounds Tendai Wale as spoken in the Shona language, mostly spoken in Zimbabwe, simply means be thankful unto the creator, the creative life force. Tendai meaning giving thanks, and Mwari being the word that is often translated into English as God. But when you look into the actual meaning of Mwari, it has more of the a definition of like the great spirit.
Mm,
I'm saying that the all-encompassing life force, yeah, that kind of energy, that kind of vibration. And so yeah, it's an honor, my brother, not only for the invite, but for the invite from somebody who is in the Caribbean, yeah, you know what I'm saying, on the island of St. Lucia.
true,
And
man.
you know what I'm saying, and we love that, you know, like I was saying to you offline, you look like you're there when me you are for there, you know what I'm saying. But we know that our people throughout the Caribbean, my direct lineage being from Jamaica one side and Antigua the next side, we have preserved a lot of our spiritual traditions and our culture. And Saint Lucia is no less prolific in that regard. And I understand that one of the major, there's a few, yeah, that have been preserved in the name is slipping me now, but I'll come back to it. There's a couple African spiritual retentions that I've had the pleasure of studying in St. Lucia.
Okay,
You know what I'm saying, so we give thanks for that connection there, so and
okay.
also for the good soca music I make over there, you know. You know what I mean?
Ah,
So we love
man.
the zouk, you know, we love the zouk, you know what I mean? So we give thanks for the zouk, you know what I mean?
True, man. But perhaps one of those African religions you're talking about, we had a religion practice roughly during the colonization period because Saint Lucia was colonialized both by the British and by the French
Correct.
as well. So we
Mm-hmm.
have this practice here called Kele, and it's basically an offshoot of the Yoruba religion where deities like Shango and Oshun um,
Yes.
is part of that. But even these indigenous cultures were actually repressed by Christianity and the Catholic Church, and is basically no more. You know what I mean? It's just a trace. And I mean, I'm guessing you actually tuned into part one, where we dealt with this understanding soul or spirit, where we
Mm-hmm.
interviewed a brother Imhotep, Ra Africa, that gave a metaphysical
Mm-hmm.
understanding towards the narrative,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so those individuals that seem to be labeling any African spirituality, or as you would call it, Kimoyo,
Mm-hmm.
as spookism. So this was really my impetus to have these interviews.
I give thanks.
So I mean, I love that you started with the explanation of Tendai Maui,
Yes,
meaning
sir.
the creator or the great spirit. So
Mm-hmm.
perhaps I don't know whether you would want to start there or start by defining, because I also got the understanding of definitions are very important from
Very.
your builds as well. You know what
Yes,
I
sir.
mean?
Yes, sir.
So this spookism talk that seems to be going around the conscious community,
Mm-hmm.
it needs some clarity, especially from a Pan Africanist standpoint. So I thought there would be no better individual to attack it from that side than the eye. So you can go in wherever you see fit. I don't know if you made a presentation for us or whatever. Go through
You
it.
know what? I didn't make a presentation for this. I do have though a presentation that I'm considering whether to. I've done it before. I'm considering whether to do it again in relation to this whole conversation. But it's entitled Kim Moyo and African Sovereignty. Yeah, and what it really does is it looks at how African spirituality relates to African nation building efforts. Yeah, historically, and how we can utilize the principles, the values, and the understanding coming out of our indigenous spiritual systems in order to forward African nation building efforts in today's age. Yeah. And so
Mhm.
you mentioned this idea about definition being very important. And this is extremely important for African people because we are speaking a colonizer language. Yeah. And we have to be clear about the role that language plays in culture. First, we have to be clear about what culture is. Yeah. And in the Al Qaeda and Revivalist movement, the organization that I was born and raised in, which is a Pan African Black Nationalist Garvey organization that is based upon a spiritual cultural foundation, which we call Al Qaeda Liberty, which is basically living according to the divine teachings and traditions of our mother culture. Yeah. The culture of
Mm.
our ancestors. All right. And so, we look at culture as the collective personality of a people, yes, manifested in their natural and complete way of life. Yeah, the collective personality of a people manifested in their natural and complete way of life. There's a great scholar, psychologist by the name of Wade Nobles. Yeah,
Mhm.
and he has a saying where he says, "Culture is to human beings like water is to fish." Yeah, we don't exist outside of a culture and a cultural context. The only question is which culture we are living or whose culture we are living. Yeah. Which cultural matrix are we existing within? And that is defining our reality. And then when you look at language, language is the organizer of thoughts and ideas. Yeah. And so you ever hear a brother or a sister from the motherland where them say, well, we have this word in my language, but I don't know the word. Sorry. Yeah,
True,
they say
true.
we have this word in my language, but I don't know the word in English to translate it. Yeah, like there is not a word for everything in every language because
I
certain
get you.
are specific to certain culture. Yeah. Or exist within a culture in ways that they don't exist in other cultures, and so you have to really explain what they mean if we're using English, right? So what
Mm.
happens is we who have been colonized as African people have had the disservice of seeing ourselves through the lens of the colonizer, yeah, in this instance, the European, yeah, and on another level, the Arab, dealing with spirituality because we've got Christianity and Islam, which are the main religions that have f- been the lens through which we have seen African spiritual systems. Okay,
So you're basically saying we are viewing African spiritual systems from a European worldview?
100%, yeah, and I'm saying that even we who are African spiritualists, yeah, have to be forensic in terms of our usage of the English language when trying to define African spiritual ideals, concepts, principles, and values. Now, why am I saying all of that? Yeah, because we often use the terminology African spirituality, all right, and because of the Judeo-Christian cultural matrix that dominates Western society, there are certain prescribed ideas that come along with words like spirit. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, and so when we look at the word spirit, it means specific things in this culture. Yes. As a consequence of the evolution of the culture and the ideas that have been associated with certain words. Yeah. So then that's why when you say spirit now, there's a specific definition and a specific idea that comes into your mind, and usually it's a non-corporeal entity or semi-corporeal entity, usually in white. We think duppy when we hear spirit, we think
Yeah,
ghost.
ghost. Yeah,
Yeah, you know what
ghost.
I'm saying, right? When we hear spirit, yeah, and then when you're looking at how the English language interfaces with African languages, you find so there's a whole heap of different word where in an African language that is often translated into English as spirit.
Mm.
You follow me? I say,
I get
yeah,
you. So
right.
in that regard, spirit is basically like a placeholder.
Placeholder. Yeah, it's a placeholder, and we have to understand it as a placeholder. Yeah, now it's a placeholder that is useful within a particular context. Yeah, but as we because that the re-Africanization of ourselves is a process. Yeah, and throughout the process, certain language becomes useful and effective at a particular point, and then we have to evolve out of it. And that's partly the reason why this terminology of Kimoyo, yeah, has been presented and used in place of African spirituality. When I dash for the term African spirituality, what we're saying is that the term Kimoyo gives greater expression, or is a term. It's only one term. There's other terms that could be used, right? But it's a term that gives greater expression to what we are trying to get at, express when we say African spirituality. Yeah. But the term
Mm.
African spirituality is useful in this day and age because we are restoring pride and dignity to the specific expressions of our African ancestors, spiritually speaking. Okay, so let's get into some definitions. Yeah, all right.
True.
In this respect. Yeah. Now, there's another great scholar. Yeah, we have some differences with the ancestor in terms of some of what she put forward. However, in her book, The Spirit of Intimacy, Mama Sabon Fusome, yeah, says that when African people or indigenous people, yeah, across the earth say spirit, what they're referring to is the life force and everything. Yeah. So spirit is not the non-corporeal or semi-corporeal entity that appears to you. Yes, that walk through wall and all them things. That's not spirit. Spirit is the life force in everything. Another terminology is the primary animating principle or force.
Mm.
Yes, of the universe, right? So that when you look through our African spiritual systems and traditions, from Kemet all the way come on down, yeah, to modern day Bakongo spiritual systems, Yoruba, Igbo, Zulu, and so on and so forth. What you find is that this concept of the universe as we know it, the material realm, yes, being complementary to a realm that is invisible but made up of forces. The reality that we know is built upon forces, yeah, that govern or unify or symbolize or uh, link the entire material realm into oneness, if that makes sense. All right.
Mm.
This is the idea that we find. So in ancient Kemet, that idea can be expressed as noon, the primordial
True.
waters, yeah, from which all reality or the material realm arises. And another term would be Ankh, which is the life force that exists in everything. Yeah. If you go to the Zulu tradition, you'll find terminologies like Untu, yeah, which is interesting because a lot of this conversation at the moment arises out of discussions that have been taking place between Brother Jabari Asazi and Brother Rabo and Muntu. Yeah. And so Muntu, the Muntu, Bantu, yeah,
Mm.
is and the Untu is a terminology that relates to again that universal life force that is in everything. Yeah. All right. So the Muntu is literally meaning this specific expression of the universal life force. That's what
Mm.
it means. Now, if you look at it, it translates it as human being. But the deeper meaning in the terminology is that this human being is a representation, a manifestation of this universal vital force. All right. If you go to the Yoruba, you're gonna find terminologies like Ashe, yeah, and Ori, yeah. Now,
Mm-hmm.
another example of this is that if you look at all the terminologies that I've mentioned, sorry, if you go to the Kikongo, yeah, tradition, you're gonna find words like moyo. Well, I'm gonna say not even just Kikongo. The term moyo and even terms like unto are terms that you find in a number of different what they call Bantu languages. Yeah, and it means things like life, spirit. It can mean things like the heart. Moya can mean heart in certain languages because the heart is essential to the sustenance of life, right? So even organs in the body are given words that relate to principles, yeah, that we find in nature. All right, and the interesting thing is that if you see translations of all of the words that I've just mentioned and so much more, they can all be translated as spirit, and often are. But when you go into the language itself, you're going to find more specificity about what is being referred to. So I'm just saying that to say, um, spirit is an inaccurate descriptor of a lot of the concepts and the terminologies that we see in
In
Africa.
African spiritual
I
systems.
should say it's insufficient. It's insufficient if we use spirit and stop dessa. Yeah.
I get you.
Right. But we use it for communication purposes because we speak English. Right. But
Yeah.
when we delve into the systems themselves, we do more justice to our own understanding and what our ancestors left for us to learn from.
So if spirit would really be that particular essence or that power or that principle
Yeah.
from the grand scheme of things, what would you now label as soul?
Now this is an interesting question because and they say um the what I come back to what I said earlier. The difference between spirit and soul is again specific to a cultural matrix, yeah, which is
Mm,
using the English language to express its ideas, yeah. So I don't. So I'm not trying necessarily, yeah, to find what spirit is and what soul is in an African language.
I
I'm
get
looking
you.
at I'm looking at the language itself and understanding the concepts on their own merit. Yeah. And then we can look at which, if we're trying to use the English language to communicate, what ways do we best express, yeah, these concepts or explain the meaning of these concepts. So if I correct me if I'm wrong, but from this paradigm, spirit, soul is more individualized, right? It's the individualized aspect to the self. Am I correct? It's
Yeah.
specific that the person, yeah, or your personality. All right. So
Personality, yes. Yeah.
right. So in this respect, then you coming back to what I was saying earlier, Yoruba, you have Ashe, which is life force energy. All right. Then you have
Mm,
Ori. Ori is often translated as head, but you have two heads. You have the outer head and the inner head. The inner head is your consciousness. Yeah. And you
mm.
notice that the Ori, and so it is often said that the Ori is your first deity. So within the Yoruba cosmology, your consciousness is divine.
Because it is first and foremost.
It is first and foremost. There's a saying in the Oduifa that no deity blesses a person without the consent of their Ori. Yeah. So even to receive blessings from the universe, you have to be in the right state of mind, the right frame of consciousness. That's what that
Mm.
means. Yeah. So I could say then in that respect that you might say that Ori, yeah, is soul, and Ashe, you could say is spirit, right? You see what I'm saying? And you notice as well that the Ori, you'll find it in the word Ori Sha, because Ori in that respect is raw, the straight um potentiality and intentionality to be, yeah. And then the Sha particularizes the Ori in relation to a specific manifestation, yeah. So so Ori is just the raw potential, and then when you add Sha to it, it particularizes it. It makes that consciousness manifest itself in a particular form, whether it's human beings, whether it's water, fire, thunder, earth, yeah, iron, whatever it is, or principles of our personality and human development in that respect. I hope all of that makes sense.
Yes, 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 it does. I'm actually trying to link it up to the Akan cosmology as you're speaking, because
Yeah,
the okra,
okra.
your okra sounds like your ori,
Yeah,
right? Which is what you basically saying, and your sunsum would
yeah,
actually sound like your personality or your soul.
yeah, yeah.
So, so this term spirit and soul within the English vernacular,
Mhm.
it seems very hard to try to define what specific cultures are saying from an African standpoint, which
That
would now label individuals who do not grasp the concept completely to label it all as spookism.
yes, I.
Because the spookism now would go back to the ghost or the duppy thing, which you
That's
say that people think about,
that's
which
right.
when you hear spirit, that's the first thing they think about.
That's right. And
Um,
sorry,
go
let
on.
me just say, bro. That is not to say that uh uh that it is not expressed in certain African spiritual systems, that spirit can manifest in that way. Does that make sense? Right? But that is not it. Yeah. So if we start with Duppy, we're missing a whole heap of context and understanding about the spiritual system itself. Right? If we reduce the system to ghosts and whether you can communicate with the dead, so to speak, we're not doing justice to the logic, the philosophy that is behind the spiritual system itself. And we are also failing to do due diligence, yeah, in terms of the evolution of African spiritual systems, in the sense of the fact that these are not revelatory religions whereby a prophet come and give you a word sound or a book, and that is it for eternity. That's the rest of creation, right? This is the only spiritual context that you ever need, yeah, in life. And also we do things, all right. Our understanding of spirituality evolves with our experiences of the universe. Does that make sense? Yeah. And
Yes, yes.
so whereas you might justifiably find some expressions, yeah, or understandings of African spirituality, yeah, that might label as spookism, yeah, but that is not the essence of the spiritual systems and the traditions, if that makes sense. All right. And so we have to differentiate, but we have to not necessarily differentiate, we have to do due diligence and contextualize everything. That is the point.
I get you, bro. I get you. I would like to read two comments from a bedroom, Aku Kromanti. He said, vitalizing life force equals breath, mind, and psyche, which equals soul.
If you want to say that, yeah, and this is the point I'm trying to make. Like for me, I don't necessarily need to use the word soul or link it to whatever the understanding of soul is in this language. Yeah. If I say, for me to say vital force is sufficient, if that makes sense in explanation, I'd prefer to just say ashe if I'm talking in Yoruba, or you know what I'm saying, or ankh if I'm using Vegetata or whatever. Is it?
Yeah. His second comment is, I think what people mean by spookism is you cannot qualify it to testing. It's an unfalsifiable claim. So I guess basically because you cannot test spirituality, or you cannot put it, through some type of experiment.
No,
Um
I think what they mean is that you can't test it according to the dictates of modern science. Yeah,
hmm,
which
mhm.
is true. But why does everything? Why is that the only lens through which something can be valid? African spiritual systems are used to socialize and organize people, and inform a particular relationship to the universe that we live in. So coming back to this idea of culture, yes, and what it is, yeah. Again, Wade Nobles says that culture has three major components. Yeah, one is ontology, yeah, which is your understanding of the self, yeah,
Mhm.
um, the nature of the self. Cosmology, your understanding of the nature of the universe. And then axiology, the primary principles and values that you
Values, yeah.
derive, yeah, from your understanding of those prior to the cosmology and the ontology. All right. So we have an understanding, therefore, of the universe. Yes.
But
Go on.
in regards to the axiology, I was doing some reading up on that. But in terms of value, right? Would we consider something valuable because we desire it, or do we desire it because it has its own value? You
Good
know what I
question.
mean?
Good question. And I think that there's nuance between those two things. Yeah. But I think that the primary thing is that from an African spiritual perspective, because the understanding is one that sees ourselves as a part of the universe, yes, as a
Mm,
part of the oneness of the universe, the primary thing that holds value is that which emphasizes and symbolizes and enhances that harmony. Yes,
I get
the
you. Yes.
idea that bringing forth life is our and sustaining and maintaining life is our principal and primary focus. Harmonizing with the life that is around us as an expression of that life is our primary endeavor. Yeah. And so
Mm,
that informs how we engage scientifically. Yeah.
Mm,
Does that make
okay.
sense? Right. So
Yes.
there are elements of that you can test scientifically. For example, this idea that the universe is one and connected and linked is one that science, astrophysics, and etc. has established. Yeah. The concept of that oneness, of the fact that we are part of the universe and what is in the universe is in us, and what is in us is in the universe, existed before the scientific tools and machinery, were able to substantiate that ideal. But the ideal was already manifested in a way of life among African people. So when you see
Mm,
the African do a ritual at the river, yes, all right, you call that spookism. When you see the African dig dirt, yeah, but before the African digs dirt, the African mixes some of the soil in a water and drinks the soil, yes,
the concoction. Yeah, yeah.
symbolizing the fact that this is a part of I and I is a part of this. Yes. When you
Hmm.
see the African do rituals around trees and all of these things, this is a manifestation or reflection of a consciousness that sees the self in a symbiotic relationship with the universe. And so rituals are created to give expression to these things. Yeah.
Mm,
We take from we draw from the universe all of the time. So therefore, we must do things physically, materially, and symbolically to give back to the universe, Mother Nature.
I get you. I
You see
get
what I'm
you.
saying? Right. So,
Yes.
so, so now you can we can reduce it to, well, all the man are bow down to tree. All the man are give offering to river. Yeah, and look at it just on the superficial, which is what a lot of people
Mm,
tend to do a lot of the time. But we can look at the consciousness that gives birth to the ritual and understand the symbolic nature of what is being done.
because a lot of brothers would label these rituals as sideshows and that they're not really necessary.
Yeah,
Like one of the comments say, if the ritual has no explanatory power or
yes.
manifestation, it essentially is spookism. The rain dance ritual doesn't make it rain.
But listen to what he said. Yeah, read the comment again.
If the ritual has no explanatory power, let me show it on the screen. See it right
Hmm.
there?
Now, the question is, do the rituals have explanatory power? That is the question. And I would agree. We don't engage in ritual for ritual's sake. Ritual must serve a social, political, economic function. And they do. Yeah. We, we,
Mm,
we just got through what them call the Queen's Jubilee over Yassa in England. Yeah. And they have all kinds of rituals that are associated with the ceremony. It don't mean nothing on a necessarily on a material level, but the nation, the consciousness of the nation, is synchronized around the celebration of the crown, the monarch of the nation, and through that celebration, they reinforce what it means to be British. Yes,
mm,
they reinforce the power of Britain in the world. Yes, and they preserve the sanctity of the institutions that govern this nation. The parliament of this country sits in the name of the crown. Yes? So, in order for the parliament to function, it has to have a relationship with the central institution, which is the crown. The crown gives the parliament its authority. And so the ritual synchronizes and reinforces that consciousness. Yeah. Before we went live today, I was listening to a live that I did on African spirituality on my channel, Shakara Speaks, where I was talking to brother Dalian Adofo, author of the book Ancestral Voices, and him and his wife, Verona, are the founders of Ancestral Voices, the film series. It's in two parts at the moment.
okay.
And they have a third film, which is on voodoo. Yeah. And so a brother who was living in Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. Yeah, I hate that name, but I said it go. But he's from Sudan. He came on and he gave the Dinka creation story, what he referred to as a Dinka creation story, the people of Sudan. Yeah. And when he went through, he was saying that the deity is called Nilek. Forgive me if I've pronounced that wrongly, yeah. But it's something like that in the Dinka tradition, and the creation story relates to the fact that the creator, when they created the people, which is specific to the Dinka now, told them to um to plant this and treat the cows in a certain kind of way, yeah. And then the creation story goes on to talk about how the different clans were created, and the relationship between the Dinka people and the people them that surround the Dinka people. Yeah. And so he finished his explanation of the story, and I'm not doing his storytelling justice, all right, at the moment. But he says, but when you look at the creation story, that creation story explains their world, yes, completely. Yeah, because it describes their relationship to the land. It describes their relationship to animals and cattle. Yeah, and if you know anything about the Dinka, the cattle is very central to their
Yeah,
economic
yeah.
development. All right, it explains their relationship to each other as clans, and it also explains their relationship to the people that are around them. And so you have rituals in that culture that give expression to that creation story because it reinforces their world and their culture. There's a brother by the name of Derek. Derek of of Fodarinwa. I've been practicing to say his family name, yeah. Derek of Fodarinwa. He runs a channel called The Medicine Shell, yeah, on YouTube, and he breaks down Igbo cosmology. It's a beautiful channel, one of my favorite channels on YouTube. And he was breaking down part of a creation story from the Igbo spiritual system, and explaining that Chineke, yeah, taught the people them, or told the people them to plant yam, yeah.
Mm.
And so we see that when you look in African spiritual traditions and spiritual systems, the narratives that are within them are not just stories for story's sake. They explain things that are essential to the culture of the people at that time. Yeah. Why? So we're talking about people that had a more agricultural society. So their creation story centers agriculture as essential to the people. Them. I feel like the brother's frozen. You there, my brother? Lot of mercy. Yeah, kings and queens, you know. So I'm just explaining one or two things. You know what I'm saying? You back? All right. So yeah. So we see, and there's other examples that I can give. But when you look at rituals in a particular culture, the if you're doing due diligence, you study what the ritual means within the cultural context. You don't just look upon the ritual and say, well, it not mean nothing. How are you aware of this? Yeah. What does this dance, this language, this symbolism, these symbols that are painted on the body or drawn on the ground, what do these colors mean? Yes. And once you understand and are able to decode the symbolism in the context of the culture, then you are in a position to say whether it's useful or not, whether it has explanatory value or not. Yeah. And all of these things. Yeah. It's the height of the word pseudoism has been used a lot in this discourse and back and forth. Yeah. And it doesn't get more pseudo than to make an assessment or a judgment about the spiritual systems and the rituals of a culture outside of that cultural context. It doesn't make sense for you to not understand the language and the symbolism of a culture and then say, well, them pseudo and it's spookism without having done the due diligence to understand whether whether what you've interpreted is even correct or not. We look at whether Africans believe in spirits or not, yeah, and these kinds of things, or whether creation stories within African spiritual systems are literal or not. unless you have done the work to understand how narrative, yes, functions within that cultural matrix, you are not in a position to decipher what is literal from what is not, how the literal relates to the non-literal, and how those two inform the culture of the people. You are not in a position to do that, and so I believe that we are doing a disservice, yeah, to our ancestors and our people when we fail to do that due diligence. For anybody who just joined in, brother Siamon has just dropped off, yeah, and some of us are waiting for him for come back, yeah. So I'm just talking as it stands at the moment. And so whilst I'm waiting, let me just consult the what you call it, something there, the Facebook, because I understand that's where most of you are commenting, and come forward. Oh, in fact, let me just share this thing quickly upon my you know what? All right, well, I'm going to the Facebook now, yeah, to see the comments, yeah, to interact with ones and ones. And if anybody, I don't mind anybody disagreeing with me, feel free to do so. Let me see where I go on. Hold on there. Before I move slower. Yeah. So that's my explanation of whether the rituals have usefulness or not. In fact, I'm going to give you an example of one in a second. There are no new comments. Yeah, there are no new comments. Right. So we're discussing whether African spirituality is spookism or not. And I was saying earlier that I have a presentation on African spirituality and African sovereignty, nationhood. Yeah, this is very important because we often negate the fact that when we're talking about African spirituality, we are talking about spiritual ideas, spiritual systems that were enshrined in political and economic development of people and culture. And so the reason why it's dangerous for us as African people to reject and neglect and subdue and reduce our indigenous spiritual systems to concepts like spookism is because we will fail doing that to appreciate the extreme value, yes, in how they were applied throughout our history. We will fail to appreciate the extreme value in how African spiritual systems informed the development of Quilombo in Brazil and maroon towns and cities all over the Americas. We will fail to understand the role of African spiritual systems in organizing anti-slavery and anti-colonial rebellions. And I'm not just talking about yeah man, the people them did possessed by the spirit of Ogun. It's only one level of the thing. Yeah, and when I said the people them wasn't possessed by the spirit of Ogun, because there was possessed by the spirit of Ogun. Yeah, another subject for another time. However, when we look at the socialization that the spiritual systems provided, we can appreciate the fact that the spiritual consciousness or the spiritual ideals were primary, not secondary, but primary in the organization of how rebellions were organized in and of themselves. We will get to the understanding, for example, that in Jamaica in the 1760s, yeah, when there was a rebellion that was waged by a man called Chief Taki, yeah, Chief Taki. And this rebellion was organized to no insignificant degree by what is called Obia men and women. And so we see after that rebellion, which was the largest anti-slavery war prior to that of Haiti, yes, which came to fruition in 1804. Yeah, we see after that war was waged, yeah, and a lot of our ancestors who waged that particular war were captured and assassinated. We see in 1760 the outlawing of what is referred to as obia, we see that literal laws were instituted not just in Jamaica, but throughout the Caribbean. There's a book on this that details the different obia laws, yeah, that were instituted, anti-obia laws that were instituted throughout the Caribbean. Yeah. I believe the book is by Kenneth Bilby, and I'm forgetting the name of the book. Yeah. But one of the things that is outlined in the book is that they did not clearly define what obia was. Yeah. But what they understood, based upon the colonizers' own documentation, is that the obia man and woman had the wherewithal to unify sometimes groups of people that had discord. Yeah, that discord existed among them. But what was able to unite them was the fact that they shared a spiritual worldview. Yes, or let me say a worldview that was expressed, through spirituality, their spirituality. Yeah, that's what the colonizer understood. And so we find the demonization of African spiritual systems connected with the institutionalization of laws to persecute those who practice the spiritual system, and the imposition of the religion and spiritual understanding of the colonizer upon us. Yes, King, you're back.
Yeah, pardon me, man. The
Well,
Wi-Fi, the internet just decided to just get on, a bit
I said it,
miserable.
King. I said
But I
it.
was listening to you, Bill, on Facebook still, and that's why it's even good for the host of the show to step out sometimes because I hold the fort so well. You know what I mean? But I was in and out. I don't know whether you could go over the last comment the veteran had where he say the rain dance don't actually bring rain. You
Yeah,
know?
and that's probably true. I mean, the rain dance specifically uh probably doesn't bring rain. I don't know, like, but let's say, for example, that the rain dance doesn't bring rain, and the idea that the rain dance is supposed to bring the rain, we would need to look into that more. Yeah, but why I'm saying that is because when we hear rain dance supposed to bring rain, oftentimes where we get that from, or concepts that from, is from colonizers writing about things that they've observed in African spiritual systems or among African people,
Mm,
right? So
mm,
we have to be careful, yeah, about that. Now, is it beyond the pale of possibility? If we understand that we are one with the universe and so on and so forth, that we can call things into being into the universe, or affect our atmosphere in ways, yeah, and so on and so forth. That's not a far-fetched idea, right? It doesn't mean that you're just going to do a dance and then the rain come. That may or may not be true. But let's say our ancestors believed that at a particular point in time. So what? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, African spiritual systems developed and evolved with the people. Yeah, like I said, these are not spiritual systems where revelation is brought from on high, and so therefore you cannot challenge or evolve through different stages of consciousness within the understanding. And oftentimes you'll find, yeah, and this is a criticism of African spiritual systems often, that the understanding that is general is not the same understanding that exists among those who are initiates into societies or communities, specific communities within the spiritual system.
mm.
Again, due diligence is necessary, yes, in all of these things. And it's important because just before you came on, I was explaining how obia, or the concept of obia, was demonized. Yeah. And so when we take away uh the African spiritual systems and cosmology and understanding, what we are doing is the work of the colonizer in attacking the African personality. It is impossible to understand what it means to be an African without an appreciation for African spiritual systems.
True, man. True.
It's impossible. It is not possible. Yes, you don't. I'm not trying. Me not convert nobody. Me not say you have to follow Ifa. Yeah,
but
I come.
but but I Yo, I really find this bill important, Shakara, and that's because we have to realize most of us coming out of colonialism, our great grandparents, I mean, the emancipation in the Caribbean happened in 1834. You
Yes,
know, I mean, some Caribbean islands, it went on again for another 50 something years.
yes,
And when we came out of that, most of us latched onto those Judeo Christian conceptualizations. You
mm,
know, so if now there is this sort of awakening going on where Black people want to know the truth, they want to get back, they want to, like a famous question is asked, what is it that Black people practiced before slavery? You know what I
uh-huh,
mean? Because spirituality is a fundamental part of African worldview and African life. So
yes,
why is it that we here in the diaspora in the West are basically shunning or ostracizing those fundamental aspects of African life and African culture? Is it that we have been away too long, or we like my brother Malik will say, like, you know, don't forget we've been in the West for quite a long time, you
mm.
know. So is that the reason possibly that we're looking for science to basically um justify or explain everything, you
Yeah,
know?
but this is the thing, right? From an African spiritual conception, yeah, African spiritual systems are nature based. Yeah. So
Yeah.
what we're doing is following a debate, yeah, which is very specific to.
Pardon me, bro, the get some background, some feedback there.
No problem, no problem, no
Yeah,
problem.
trying to go in and me block a man. I see somebody there chatting, some sending some stupid comments in the thing there, man. But yeah,
Okay.
go on thing. Mhm.
No, don't worry about this. We can deal with the shipping comments still as well, you know. So when you're ready, you just put them to me and we'll deal with them. But in my humble observation, we're following the trajectory of Western civilization in terms of the debates that have taken place within it. Yeah. It was
Mm.
necessary within Western civilization for its own development, for a certain sector of its society to challenge the authority of the church, because the church was presiding over a social order that was scientifically retarding the development of the people. Yeah. And this is because the religious worldview that they came from was not one that privileged nature. Yeah. It was not one that saw the human being as a manifestation of and connected to nature. Yeah. And so it produced, and even the science produces activity, behavior that treats the universe and nature as an object. Yeah. It objectifies nature and the universe. And because the African worldview conception is nature based and seeks to be in harmony with nature, the spirituality is informed by our understanding and through our relationship to nature. Yeah. So the idea of spirit is not divorced from our experience and relationship to nature. We don't develop spirits outside of nature. Yeah. And that doesn't happen. We don't have the same issues. So what is taking place at the moment is that there is a popular scientific narrative that whereby white people in Britain and America and other places in Europe are still going to war with the church and
Why is
religious
that?
institutions. As I've said, because it's a necessary outgrowth of the fact that the religious conceptuality in Europe divorced people or believed that you could learn all you need to know about the universe was housed in the Bible. Yeah. And
Mm.
so anything that challenged the authority of the Bible was seen as heretical. Yeah. So this retarded the explorations of the universe. People have been assassinated and persecuted within Western society for studying the stars and the orbit of planets, yeah, and how and physics, yeah. The church went to war right? With the
Yeah, yeah.
scientific community in Europe. That's a fact. So there's an ongoing tension between science and religion in Europe that is not replicated in many other cultures in the world. Yeah. And so what is happening is that because a lot of us within Western society have been indoctrinated into that kind of consciousness, yeah, uh, uh, we've picked up a lot of the Western religious community ways of relating to our spiritual systems. Even some of us in African spiritual systems, yeah, because we've still got we're carrying that baggage. So now, and because even the colonial ideal has affected even the way some of us indigenously. So, for example, when we say Oludumare is God, we're really doing a disservice to Oludumare. Does that make sense? Because
Yeah, man.
when you break down Oludumare, it not mean God. Yeah, God is an insufficient terminology to break down Onyame, Nyankopong, yeah,
Nyankopong.
right,
Yes.
etc., etc.
Hmm.
God is not God is not a sufficient terminology to break down Amenra. Yes, Unkulunkulu, Nokubuane, yeah, Nzambi. Just to say God, Moali, just to say God is not sufficient, right? But because the colonizer translated a lot of the Bible into a lot of our languages, yeah, and in order to compete, sometimes people have related or gone overboard, yeah, and spent inordinate amounts of time trying to correlate African spiritual systems with Christianity and Islam because those religions carry prestige, yeah, at particular points in time. And so, in order to restore respectability to our indigenous spiritual systems, we had to show people actually we have these concepts within our spiritual systems as well. All right. And so we're all
Mm.
carrying that baggage. Yeah. But when we look at African spirituality, there's a book by the name of Introduction to Yoruba Religious Concepts, yeah, by Ifa Karade. And in it, he says, to the Yoruba, the study of nature is primary. Yeah. That's why the Odisha all have natural attributes associated with them because the people them are studying nature. They're not creating entities out of thin air, right? They're connecting with the vital animating force, yes, within these particular expressions and developing concepts out of them that relate not just to our relationship to the particular elements of nature in question, but the Orisha also have personality traits, yes, that relate to us as human beings. Yes. Why? Because the goal of Isheshe, the or Ifa, is to achieve what? Iwapele, balanced character. Balanced character exists on the realm of the individual, but it also exists on the realm of the collective, the family, the community. It also exists on the realm of the universe. Yeah. And so Iwapele, that balanced character, that balanced livity with the universe is manifested through we give the different expressions of the universe a name, and we develop rituals that teach us how to relate to these various different manifestations, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
So the
that's why.
rituals itself.
One more
So
point.
the rit.
One more
One,
point.
one.
One more point.
Go
One
on,
more
go
point.
sure.
It's also why one of the defining features that you'll find that historically, this is something that I'm still studying, right? So I'm not an expert on this element, but they say that most African societies didn't experience a Bronze Age, went straight from the stone to the iron, yeah. And when you
Mm.
look at what proliferated the Iron Age in in African cultures, it was the spiritual system because the iron or the blacksmith in many different African spiritual systems. One of the things that links African spiritual systems is blacksmiths, yeah, and iron work, yeah. In fact, in the Bakongo spiritual system, uh, is it the term? There's a term that relates to the term nganga, yeah, and forgive me for it because it's slipping me at the moment, yeah. But it relates to the person who is the chief blacksmith in the community. This is a spiritual title. It's also a political title, right? If that makes sense, yeah.
Mhm.
So the development in the works, yeah, in terms of manipulating metal, which is a key scientific endeavor, yeah, was organized around guilds that were connected to spiritual systems and spiritual ideals. Does that make sense? Because we're studying nature. So we sacralize nature. The Western conception, and in many ways, the Abrahamic conception, desacralizes nature. That's why it's taboo, yes, to bow to a tree in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. That's why it's taboo to reverence ancestors and the river and the various different animals around you because they desacralize the universe and nature. The African sacralizes the universe and nature. Therefore, the African spiritual expression is centered around the study of nature. So astrophysics, yeah, is a very African endeavor because we're looking at the essence, the very heart. We're probing, yeah, the very heart of the universe and our reality through the study of astrophysics. You can't divorce that from an African spiritual conception, except for in terms of the primary principles that govern that exploration.
I get you, brother. Give thanks, man. That's an amazing build you're going in, Shakara. I ain't even gonna lie. But earlier, what I was gonna ask is, while while you labeled and you properly explain a ritual being um to show that the interconnectedness we have and the relation we have in regards to us and nature and the
Yeah.
universe, you also explain it as also being a lesson as well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I found that very deep, man, very deep. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, I think honestly that you have explained and basically in a nutshell saying that those terms of spirit and soul within the English language that we speak are basically placeholders and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily define the
Mm-hmm.
particular term in the African language or culture that we
Yes,
are
sir.
speaking about. You
Yes, sir.
know, so
Yes, sir.
that there is very powerful.
Yeah.
As you can see on the screen, brother says, I think every culture has spookism and Africans are not exempt.
Most definitely.
Um,
I would I would disagree with that. But the idea that African spirituality is spookism is what is an idea that I reject. Yeah, I
but
did say I did say at the beginning that doesn't mean that there are not certain expressions of or understandings within
within
African
it,
system, yeah, that you may justifiably refer to as spookism, and a lot of this also has to do with the denigration of our spiritual systems. For example, coming out of the African experience in the Caribbean, one of the reasons why Obia has a bad name, yeah, um, is big up my brother Tahaka, Scattered Minds in the building. Give thanks, my brother. It's good to have you with us. Yeah, one of the reasons why Obia gets a bad name is because the Obia devotees, or well, like I said, they never define what Obia is. So Obia is a blanket terminology that is used to describe all kind of African spiritual systems. Yeah, but
bro.
because it was banned and people were being persecuted for adhering to the spiritual systems, it had to go underground. Yeah, and so whereas it was understood that there was a malevolent and a benevolent way to use the knowledge of the spiritual system, just like there is in anything. Yeah. What happened was a premium within the context of enslavement began to be emphasized with in relation to harming, because you were fighting a war, right? You had to kill off slave master and all them thing there, and so on and so forth. But because it had to go underground, the social systems associated with the spiritual system, yes, were degenerated. Does
Mm.
that make sense? Yeah.
Yes,
So
it does.
whereas you would have received various different levels of understanding and knowledge and ways of relating and so on and so forth in a particular context, that was degraded, and so the spiritual system itself became degraded. How it was practiced became degraded. Yeah, even on the live, yeah, that facilitated a lot of this conversation on Sarnetta's show about spirituality. There was a brother from the motherland. I can't remember which country he was from, but he was saying there has been degeneration in our culture. Yes, based upon our experiences, and that degeneration, it has manifested in some of our spiritual systems or our understanding of some of our spiritual systems. There's no denying that, right? But to reduce uh the spiritual systems themselves exclusively, yes, to that is incorrect, and from a scholarly point of view is inherently pseudo. All right. I want to share something with you actually. Um, there's a book by the name of The Eloquence of the Scribes. Yeah. All
Mhm.
right. By Ayi. If you don't know Ayi, get to know Ayi. Two of my favorite books he has written. One is called 2000 Seasons. And another is called The Healers. And interestingly enough, he actually goes into uh in the narrative, if you have eyes to see, he's actually exploring at different points even this subject of the degeneration of our spiritual systems, the spiritual understanding that we had, and how it is co-opted by opportunists in response to the different invasions and colonizers and so on and so forth that we experience at different points. Yeah, he's actually engaging that, and challenging certain even expressions of what we might call African spiritual systems. And I guarantee a lot of people that are engaged in this conversation haven't read books like that, and haven't looked into how African spiritual, the conversations that are taking place within the African spiritualist space. Yeah, among people that are affirming the traditions, who are challenging each other in terms of the understanding of the spiritual systems themselves. Yeah, but I want to read this because it explains a few things that are important in terms of the idea of narrative. Yeah, and he says ordinary Akan stories are known as Anansisem. Yeah. Now, if you listen good, you will hear the word Anansi.
Yeah, facts. Yeah, yeah.
Right. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
the first thing I catch on you, man. Because we have Anansi stories down here in St. Lucia.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
All over the Americas, right? So it says ordinary Akan stories are known as Anansisem, after the spider who figures in many of them as folk and anti-hero. Yeah. And even Anansi
Mhm.
is a concept that we could get into very deeply. All right. But
Yeah.
for now, family histories are esoteric, which means that they're specific, yeah, to family lineages. All right, distinguished from ordinary exoteric, yeah, for general consumption and public stories by a different name. They are called abakosem. Yeah, so the family stories are called abakosem. A working paraphrase would be narratives of times past. Literally, Abba, it has happened. Ko, it is gone. Asem, matter, narrative. Yeah. All right. So we've got two different narrative traditions among the Akan people. Yes. Anansisem and Abakosem. Once again, Anansisem, after the spider who figures in many of them as folk and anti-hero. Anansisem are cosmological stories. They're stories that give expression and explain the nature of the universe. So you have stories of Nyame or Nyankopong, and some say that Nancy is an abosom, which is a force of nature. Some say he's
Mm.
not an abosom, but a particular manifestation, or emanation or aspect of Nyame. Either way, um, Anansi is at one level the character who organizes the universe. Yeah, the web being symbolic of that. All right. Anansi is also the keeper of wisdom. That's why all stories are Anansi stories, because all wisdom is expressed through narrative. Yeah. Are we following this? All right.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And
Right.
even though at times that wisdom may seem to come about through a trickery kind of way, where he usually tricks. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
but
go on.
but it's the moral of the story that is important. So we
Yes,
could look at
yes.
another stories and say, well, the people them literally believe a spy turned into a man. You see what I'm
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But,
yeah,
but if
yeah,
we
yeah.
understand the
It's a
symbolism
zoomorphic, anthropomorphic representation
of
of a
this,
principle. Yes.
if we understand what it means within the culture, then we're not gonna chat them foolishness there. Yeah. All
True,
right.
man.
Now
True.
let me explain something else then, right? That is related to that. Yeah. He says, because this is he's a writer, yeah, and so he's explaining in this book, yeah, the development of his literary consciousness and modalities, yeah, and so he's explaining abacusem and anantism in order to define and express the literary or narrative traditions that of the culture that he was born into. Does that make sense? All right.
Mhm.
Then he goes on to say, it is difficult to persuade African children growing up with such a background of family history that they come from a people without a history. Yeah. He says, thinking back, it occurs to me that under logical circumstances, my growth would have taken me into a school system in which my initial fascination with narrative forms like abacusem and anantism I brought from home might have deepened into increasingly systematic specialized studies in fiction, drama, and poetry. On the one hand, in parenthesis, equivalent to anantism, and on the other, history, philosophy, sociology, in parenthesis, the equivalent of abacosem. Yes. The educational progression this would have entailed could have been entirely natural. He said, when I got to secondary school, however, I entered a learning world in which practically everything I did in the classroom was planned to pull my mind steadily away from the narratives and realities I knew from home towards a different kind of narrative made in Europe. Yeah. And he goes on to explain how good later on how because Shakespeare was the definer of what good storytelling was and good narrative and so on and so forth. It being able to tell a good story often required you, yes, to use language and symbolism that was peculiar to Europe and Britain in particular. Yeah, we have story, where you know when we celebrate Christmas, yeah, in Africa and the Caribbean, yeah, we often decorate windows with snow,
Mm.
and it no snow where we there.
True.
Yeah, and some places even if it snow, it don't snow in December. Yeah, and like so in South Africa, for example. But the language and the symbolism that we have been given says, well, you must have snow for Christmas. Why? Because it's snow.
It's a white Christmas.
Yeah, right. You see what I'm saying? So
I
we
get you.
associate a good Christmas with snow, right? And all of these
Mm.
things. And you hear about stories of picnic in a Jamaica or St. Lucia. They might dream about the snow and they come back to England and they find the snow. Right? It's an example. So the point I'm making is that I was listening to another live on the medicine show today, and they said that spirituality is impossible without storytelling. Yeah, these narratives give us expression of the African worldview. You cannot engage African culture without engaging African spirituality, and there is no African liberation without African culture. It doesn't
So
exist.
African spirituality is part of the culture, and complete African liberation cannot come about without us fully immersing in African culture and all faculties,
It
all
is
aspects of it.
it's impossible. My father says spirituality is the
Hmm. It's a deep statement, man.
spirituality is the foundation of African culture. Yes, the core of African consciousness and the essence of the African personality. There's another freedom fighter by the name of Okot Pitek, yeah, who says words to the effect that the understanding of our spirituality is the key to understanding the culture of our people. Yeah. diminishing and reducing our spirituality to just spookism negates that entire understanding. Yeah, it's impossible to understand how the Igbo. Well, let's put it this way: how the Igbo socially, economically, and politically organized is best explained through an understanding of the spiritual systems, the narratives associated with the spiritual systems of the Igbo people. So when we reduce African spirituality, like I said, to ritual, we're missing the point. Right?
Mm.
We're missing the point. You have to look at how do these spirit, especially in the African context, how do these ideas and rituals reinforce the social, political, and economic order? And you will notice, my brother, in the conversations that you're having and observing, brothers and sisters online, that question is not being probed.
True, man.
Man, I ask, what is spirit? And then you tell them, well, within an African centered consciousness, this is what it is. And then I tell you, say you're wrong. Why? Because Webster says, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Oxford says, and even then, they're being, I mean, because me don't tell them something they already, they're being very selective with which definitions they quote,
Definition,
right? From
facts,
different
facts,
dictionaries.
bro.
Because even Fidem Dictionary has, when it comes to words like spirit and spirituality, they will tell you themselves there is not one definition. There is a variety of definitions
Mm.
for these terminologies.
Mhm, 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 mhm. Because even in part one, when I went about to define it, I went to the definition of spook because everyone is just on a spookism, right? We got ghosts. When I went on the definition of ghost, the first definition of ghost said the seat of intelligence or soul. It was the second definition that says this corporeal, spirit that can move through walls and them kind of thing there. So, like you said again, is what definition they nitpick,
You,
to best go and fit the narrative that they are
of
trying
course.
to bring about.
And it is the case that like within the Al-Qaeda revivalist movement, we differentiate between spirituality and spiritism. Spirituality being a way of life, yeah, a way of life that is steeped in reverence to the divine creation and divine inner cultivation. Yes, spiritism
Mm,
is a diminishment of that ideal, whereby the first of all it becomes very individualistic, whereby it is centered around individual levitation, yeah, and floating, yeah, in the air, right, and just
mm.
achieving a superficial idea of what peace is. It's not communal. It doesn't build community. Spiritism. It doesn't build nation. Doesn't build civilization. It's just an individual,
It's an
often vain,
individual thing.
yeah, what's it called, vain exercise, yeah, and a lot of us are engaged in that. Even in the name of African spirituality, we're engaged in individualistic self gratification and ego boosting. That's true. But those
Mm.
conversations take place among people that adhere to African spiritual systems. Yeah. So for those who are, and when you study a conversation, you begin, what begins to be revealed is either the work that people are doing or are not doing, or the uh the environments that people are or are not exposed to. Give you an example. I was in I had a brief exchange with Brother Rob on one of his posts on Facebook. Yeah, and he said to me that the conscious community doesn't lead with black nationalism and black and Pan Africanism. It leads with uh, religion and spirituality. I'm coming from the Al Qaeda and revivalist movement. Yeah, we are a black nationalist Pan Africanist organization that is built upon an authentic African spiritual cultural ideology called Al Cable and Liberty. Yeah, my entire life is steeped in the culturalization of spirituality, sorry, the politicization of spirituality, and the spiritualizing of politics. Yeah, but we often interface with organizations in the Pan African community who are not necessarily spiritually inclined, but politically inclined. So they foreground black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. For example, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, yeah, is a Pan-African organization. They would speak in terms of revolutionizing or using culture as a revolutionary tool and vehicle, but they're not necessarily spiritually inclined, although there are members of the AAPRP who are, right? But they're, from an organizational point of view, they don't foreground spirituality. Yeah, they're Pan-Africanists. Yeah, so to say that the conscious community doesn't foreground black nationalism and Pan-Africanism is a reflection of the people them that the brother is engaging with. It's not a reflection of the conscious community or the
as a
Pan-African.
whole.
Pardon?
No, I say it's not a reflection of the conscious community as a whole. It's just
As
a
a whole.
particular section. Yeah, it's just
Exactly. So if one is engaging completely with people that debate religion 24/7, 365, then that is going to be the sum total, or at least the majority of your engagement and your work and your and the work that you engage with. It's that simple.
Powerful, my brother. Powerful. So we have first questions. We'll start to even take the questions in.
Yes,
The
sir.
brother says, "So are we to suggest there's no African spookism and it's a misrepresentation based on our limited understanding?"
My brother, I think I've already answered that question. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
You can, there are certain, again, there are
yeah.
certain expressions or understandings of African spirituality that we might justifiably or not define as or impose the label of spookism on them. Does that mean that African spirituality itself is spookism? No.
Scholarly, as you would say, no, yeah.
Yeah.
But well, yeah, we'll move on to the next one. Scattered Mind says, "Good point about the Western Church versus our experience with African spirituality. How do Africans go about state building without following Western concepts such as church versus state in our endeavors?"
It's a beautiful question. So the first is, well, the first is to understand the African worldview. Yeah. And the African worldview is a paradigm that houses the axiology of African people collectively, or let's say the primary axiology of African people collectively. Yeah. And I think through that we will understand that we will understand and develop an appreciation for the primary principles and values that govern social organizations among African groups of peoples in general. Yeah, I'll give you an example of what I mean. You will find that in a lot of West African spiritual systems, women control the market. Yeah, which is the central economic institution of the people. The control of the market gave them political power. But the reason, or the logic behind women's control of the market was informed by the understanding of the cosmology and the ontology of the people. Women are often associated with the earth, yeah, and
Mhm.
principles to do with the earth. And because the agricultural sector was central, yes, to the people's economy, yeah, and women's role as mothers was sacralized, yeah, within that particular consciousness. All right, this informed the the roles that women were given in society. Okay, but the economic in that sense was not divorced from the spiritual, was not divorced from the political, and so on and so forth. The other aspect of it, in my humble estimation, Papa Garvey says, in science and religion lies our only hope to withstand the evils of modern materialism. We have to become more scientific about our spirituality. Yeah. So in that sense, right? Studying the nature of the universe from an astrophysics point of view doesn't diminish my spirituality, it enhances it. You follow me? Yeah.
I get you.
Because again, the study of nature is primary. So we don't need to do away with our African narrative traditions, our Anantism, in order to appreciate the Big Bang, for example, or the four fundamental forces of the universe. Yeah, weak and strong. Yeah, nuclear, electromagnetic, and gravity. We don't need to do away with what we would do is create an answer that give expression and explain those things. Does that make sense?
It
And the
does, bro.
reality is, in a lot of sense, in a lot of instances, we don't have to create them. What if I told you there's a concept of quote unquote Big Bang in the Dogon spiritual system? There's a concept of creation that relates to the quote unquote Big Bang in Bakongo cosmology, in Igbo cosmology. I'll explain the Igbo one in brief. Chi, the term for the creator in Igbo, or one of the terms for the creator in Igbo cosmology, is Chineke. Yeah. Now, this is often a terminology that when you're asking, they're going to say it means God. Why? Because when the Bible was translated into Igbo, they used Chineke as the term for God or Yahweh. But the term is Chi na Eke. The Chi is the same as Ori. Yeah. It's that vital consciousness, that primary, primordial consciousness. Yeah.
Would be the same as Moyo.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
In a lot of respects. All right. Eke is the manifestation of the creation itself. Yeah. And so in a lot of African spiritual systems, the seen and the unseen realm are not distinct from each other. They're parts of an entire whole. Yeah. So the creator is the primary force of creation and the creation itself. And that is given expression in the name for the creator. Chineke, Chi na Eke. Yeah. And so within the cosmology of the Igbo, there's a story that suggests that the creation came into being when Eke exploded and Chi brought to get back together or organized the different parts of Eke, yeah, right, to reform her body, yeah, and that was done through listen to this now, a cosmic spider by the name of Obibi, yeah, to basically weave the web to connect, yeah, all the different aspects, yeah, of Eke, the universe itself now, through strings. I'm not gonna go any further, but my astrophysicists or people that study astrophysicists, when I said strings, something came to mind.
What, string theory, wave and particle? What?
Yes, I.
Yeah, true,
All right.
true.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
the point I'm making is that so then and we would simply explain our new scientific understanding using our own cultural matrix. No people step outside of their culture in order to explain science, not even Europeans. Yeah. What Europeans have done is make their culture look universal. And therefore, in order to explain science within the context of European hegemony, the only way that you can be scientific is to be European. Yeah. But we look past the fact that the word,
Damn,
yeah.
that is deep. That deep statement making, because see, when you said that the Europeans are not exempt, I kind of see what you're saying, okay? Because we have this deity called Kronos within Greek culture, right?
I,
And
I,
chronology,
I,
which basically is time, the study of time, is named after that particular
after that day,
deity.
I.
So that is how the spirituality or religion, however you want to call it, is actually linked to even the science. So these things we don't actually observe
When we said to you a
when
while ago,
we
King, we said to you, no people step outside of their culture in
facts, bro.
order to explain science.
Facts,
Yeah.
bro.
All
Yeah.
right. So we
Okay.
have the concepts within our culture, yes, to explain the new knowledge that we have gotten and received from studying the universe. We have it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The example that I was going to use, you've brought another example. The example that I was going to use is the term atom. Yeah. Atom, from my understanding, is a terminology that comes from Greece because they were speculating about the smallest particle or building block that built up the universe. And the term atom in Greek, or the term that the term atom is derived from, means indivisible. So when modern day scientists discovered the atom, they thought it was impossible to divide it. So they used the term that came from Greek speculation about the universe to as the noun terminology for the atom. They discovered,
Indivisible.
yeah, they discovered that the atom was in fact divisible, right? Right? Into
Into
electrons,
parts.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, protons and neutrons, all kind of different thing. All right.
Mm.
Them never changed the word, the name of the atom, It's still name atom for them,
Sure,
even
man.
though literally the meaning doesn't apply. Yeah. So they're able to preserve their cultural uh affirmation, yeah, within their scientific exploration. Yeah. Whereas because we diminish our own culture and refer to it as spookism, we don't realize it. The terminologies and the concepts within our indigenous knowledge systems can and do help us to describe the universe.
It's powerful, my bro. It's powerful, Shakara, man. Powerful, my bro. I have another, well, sort of a question. What are you guys' thoughts on the Zangbato tribe and their spiritual traditions? Zangbato, I feel, spiritual people of the night. I think that's in Igun tradition, Benin
I
area, Togo,
I
Nigeria.
I haven't studied the Zangbato specifically, yeah. So that
Mm.
that is something that I'm gonna put on my list. There's nothing, that I saw a book the other day that was looking at the African presence in Panama, and I got excited and I realized, I love to learn about African people. I just love to learn about the African diaspora. So I'm
True,
definitely
man.
gonna put the Zangbato on my list of African nations. I don't like the word the use of I don't like the word tribe. Yeah, tribe
Yeah,
carries
yeah.
tribe carries a lot of. I'm not getting at the brother or sister who's written
I
this.
know, I know. We
Yeah, but
actually
yeah,
came across that. Well, I came across that bill in one of your videos actually, that tribe being used to designate or classify a particular people that often perhaps didn't call themselves tribes, perhaps nations, but the
right.
word tribe
Tribe.
carries a connotative
Yeah, yeah.
kind
You
of.
know what I'm saying. So
Yeah, I can go in.
yes, I say it.
No, I mean you can go in on that really. I
Oh yeah,
mean you know when I heard
no,
it from someone.
in short, the tribe, the term tribe was imposed upon African people because of the connotations of primitiveness, barbarity, and savagery that is associated with it. Yeah, and I'll just use an example. Europe or Britain has various different what could be referred to as tribes, but they tend not to refer to them as tribes. Yeah, they don't refer to the Normans as tribes. Yeah, the Celts. Yeah, the Anglo Saxons, the Vikings, yeah, they tend not to refer to their European ancestors in the context of tribes. They give them a designation of peoplehood, of nationhood, and so we want to discard that colonial imposition when we speak of our African indigenous people groups. So we use terms like nation and people. You know what I'm saying? Society, community,
Yeah.
civilization, etc., etc., etc.
True, man. Skylar Mind said, I'd argue that Islam does see nature as sacred, just not divine.
Um, my brother is a Muslim, So
So okay, so yeah, okay.
that's right. That's why he suggested that. I'm not going to argue with that. But except to affirm that within African spiritual system, it's nature is sacred and divine. Yeah. And I think that the key designation here, or the key difference, is that and me and my brother have had these conversations, so he would probably be even preempt what I'm about to say. But the key difference is that the Islam and Christianity see the creator as distinct from the creation. Yeah. Whereas indigenous
Mm.
African spiritual conceptions don't necessarily see it that way. In fact, I was listening to a brother who was dealing with Akan spirituality, and I can't remember his name, so forgive me. But he said it's not that God is the source of life, it's that God is life.
It's life itself. Yes, yes. Yeah,
Right?
man.
Which is
Wow.
different. So whereas my Abrahamic brothers and sisters would agree that God is the source of life, but they
But
wouldn't
he's not
necessarily
life, but
see
he's
God
not.
life itself, right? You see what I'm saying?
Facts,
So
facts,
that
facts.
is
So
different.
so that alone can show us a very simple but very fundamental distinction between a European worldview and an African worldview. Because in the European worldview, God is basically outside of nature, outside of space and time,
Yes, sir.
if you want to put it that way. But in the African worldview,
Yes,
he's
sir.
also outside and also a part of the
Yes,
very
sir.
same creation.
Yes,
You
sir.
know?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, powerful, my brother.
Yes,
Powerful,
sir.
man.
Yes, sir.
We have a statement here. The guy says, does it matter which spirituality you align with? African hair is too broad. Meaning when
It
you just
it
leave
it
it.
it, it, it does matter. Uh, I'm going to read you something. Yeah. And this is coming from my father. Yeah. Uh, in a text. Yeah. That he has written that is yet to be published. Yes, I'm not going to blow up the name. All right. Um,
Okay.
but because I'm his son, I have access to it. Yeah. And my father is my principal teacher when it comes to these matters. And his name is Brother Leader Bandaka. Yeah. And he explains in the text. Yeah. He's given a backdrop. And he says, against this backdrop, African spirituality is defined as an African way of life steeped in reverence to the divine creation and divine inner human cultivation. He says the term African way of life is essential to the above definition of African spirituality because it emphasizes the centrality and divinity of African people, as well as the indispensability of African culture and its traditions in the expression of African spirituality. It therefore emphasizes African people engaged in a way of life that is submerged in praise and veneration of the supreme being and the nurturing of the human soul according to the nature in which the creator created us as Africans. Yeah, the practice of African culture and its traditions is crucial because, in the words of the master teacher Baba Yusuf Ben Yokanan, substituting the word religion for the word spirituality, spirituality is the deification of a people's culture. Therefore, the religion or spirituality empowers the people within whose culture the religion is expressed. So it is important, for us as African people, because we have been brought through a process of oppression that has largely been actioned through the denigration of our culture and the demonization of our spirituality within that context. Our social, political, and economic order was destroyed. And as a result, our spiritual understanding and how we express it within our political, economic, and social order was destroyed. So we are going through the process of liberation. And that, as we say in the Al liberation begins with the freeing of the mind and the spirit. Yeah. So we cannot overcome the oppression that we are currently facing if we don't challenge the psychic damage that has been done to our beingness as African people? Are we engaged in an African liberation process if we are liberating ourselves pursuant to ideals and identity of people other than African? Is it possible to liberate yourself as an African according to European or Asian or Arabic dictates?
I'm kind of broke up there a little bit. Run the question again.
It's a rhetorical question, but I was saying, is it possible
Mm.
to liberate yourself as an African according to European, Asian, or Arabic dictates?
Mm.
We have to have a sense of ourselves, and that sense of self comes from our culture. Who we are as African people is defined by our culture.
And
Yes,
not just by geographical locale,
not
because a lot
just
of us
by
were born
geography.
on the African continent.
And as you've already said, spirituality is the foundation of African culture, the core of African consciousness, and the essence of the African personality. I hate that. Now, on the point of African being too broad, that's a false idea. The idea of the African identity comes into being in our liberation process to be an umbrella to our various different expressions of indigenous Africanness. Yeah. We are emphasizing when we say African, our relatedness to each other. Our differences are not necessarily contentious. So you don't have to discard your Yoruba to be an African. You don't have to discard your Zulu or your Xhosa or your Ndebele or your Kikuyu or your Kikongo, Bakongo, sorry, Mukongo, or your Dinka, your Nuer. Yeah, you don't have to discard your Luba, yeah, to be an African. The African embraces all of these various different expressions of Africanness. But it is essential when we talk about African spirituality because we are not dealing with a situation in which some African spiritual systems were denigrated. We are dealing with the idea that being African was a justification for denigration, for the characterization of savage and barbaric, and so on, etc., etc., etc. And so when we say African spirituality, Kimoyo, we are bringing together and unifying the varying different expressions and restoring prestige, dignity, and pride to them collectively within the relatedness to each other as African people. And finally, anybody that has done significant studies on African spirituality and culture will come to the conclusion that there are many similarities and essential principles and values that are shared. Yeah,
With all of them. Yes,
among
yes, yes,
us. Yeah, and
yeah.
so that's what we're emphasizing. So
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you pour libation the way I pour libation. What matters
Facts.
is that we honor our ancestors.
And the understanding. I get you. I get you. I get you. I get you, man. I get you. But oftentimes, when scholars, such as Brother Kamani, Wobogo, when these individuals try to show the correlation and the cultural continuity or the synchronicity between cultures from the East and the West, they often label as pseudo, by those very same individuals, saying that those cultures are thousands of years apart and they could never really be the same, not realizing the cultural undertone connecting all of them, and even, that um, um, the Anansiism, really, we can say, within that web connecting, all of these cultures.
You
And
know, you
that's
know,
just beautiful, my brother.
you know what I discovered the other day as well. Not the other, well, I say I discovered. I was reading the work of Baba Kim Wan Dende Kiabun Seki Fukiao, and he was explaining this idea of Lukosi, yeah, in Kikongo language and what he referred to as Bantu cosmology in general. And the Lukosi is a web. Yeah. What create web? Spider. All right.
Virus.
So the Lukosi was basically your net, yeah. Like a concept of a net that you use to map out and understand your environment. Yeah. What he calls the Kinzungidila. Yeah. What's it called? The environment. And so it's basically your means of political, economic, and social growth within your environment, because you have to understand your community and your nation and the universe and so on and so forth. But this is conceptualized as a net. Yeah. So you in the middle, and your net links you to the various different aspects of your environment. My point is that there's a lot of even just the symbolism, yeah, that we find in African spiritual systems. They're not necessarily the same, but when you look into it, they're reinforcing a lot of the same concepts, or they're related to each other through how they're applied. So Anansi is the same, yeah. A lot of us learn about why was Anansi so preserved among us in the diaspora? Because what happens is we have desacralized Anansi a lot in a lot of senses, right? Remember, Anansi is Abosom, is a spiritual, yeah, character, yeah,
Yeah,
archetype within the indigenous Akan,
Akan one culture,
yeah,
yeah,
right. You know what I'm saying?
cosmology.
Whereas, you know, him just like a spider where we tell some story about, yeah, right, and them thing there. But why was Anansi so preserved? And this is how my father taught it to me. He said Anansi became so popular and preserved among us in the diaspora because Anansi was the stories of Anansi depicted him frequently having to go up against animals that were, to all intents and purposes, stronger than he was, but
Bigger
he
than
was
it
able
was.
to outsmart them, yeah, through
Mhm.
wit, through having an understanding of nature and the environment that maybe Brer Lion or Brer Tiger, yeah, or Brer Mongoose never had, yeah. So it was the intelligence of Anansi that enabled him to survive in often hazardous conditions, yeah. And so that consciousness became essential for us within the condition of colonization and enslavement, right? This is what I'm
Mm.
saying. And so the same can be said for Ezilidanto or Dambala or Ogun or Anshango, yeah, within the various different Fon or Yoruba spiritual retentions that we have throughout the Americas.
That's just beautiful, my brother. I mean, anyone who watches that show can really have a deeper appreciation for African spirituality. Although it is labeled, as you often say, as pagan or heathen, shirk or haram in other cultures. You know what I mean? So, family, as we have it, I mean, we've had the brother on for 2 hours, though we were actually late, and I know you in the UK, so it must be 5 hours ahead. It's probably midnight going
Just a
going
couple.
through. So I just want to give thanks for the bill and the questions, my brother, and I hope the individuals that are really heartily looking to get the truth in regards to this spookism talk going around and understanding terms which are really placeholders such as spirit and soul from an African worldview and perspective is very fundamental and important
Yes, sir.
and vital, I should say, in the complete African liberation. As Marcus Garvey said, since 1844 or 1865, which is Juneteenth today,
Mm-hmm,
when most of us were physically liberated,
mm-hmm.
emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, and these are what these bills are really about, family. So, brother Shakara, I don't know if you have any closing statements, but I just want to give thanks again, my brother, all from the UK. Man did actually spend some time in the UK, West London.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
So yeah, but I never knew about Speaker's Corner at that time.
All right,
I
all right.
attended what do you call it? The Hammersmith and West London College
Yes,
for a couple years there. You know what I mean? So yeah, so any closing statements, my brother? The
no,
floor is yours.
my brother, just giving thanks for the invitation to build with the eye. I truly appreciate it. And when we come to St. Lucia, may I come look you. You know what I'm
Straight
saying?
up, man.
And
Straight,
all these things, and keep
straight.
up the good work, my brother. I've had an opportunity to browse your channel and I haven't been able to go in depth, but from what I have seen, you're doing some beautiful work. Yeah, some
Give
powerful
thanks, my bro.
and and
Give
and,
thanks.
and beautiful work. And I give thanks for you to reaching out to me and connecting with me and making sure that this happens. And I want to send love to my brothers and sisters in St. Lucia. One of the things that we must do as Africans from the Caribbean is cross the language barrier. Yeah. In terms of French speaking and Spanish speaking and English speaking. Yeah. We don't connect enough across the colonial language barrier. And so, in terms of many people believe that for Pan Africanism, they seem to believe that it's exclusive to the African continent. But Pan Africanism is about the liberation and unity of African people. Yes, and,
Worldwide.
and worldwide. And yes, the power base is designed to be Africa because it is our ancestral home. Yeah, and because of the significance of Africa as our motherland as well as the continent, with so much wealth and beauty and and so on and so forth. However, yeah, Pan Africanism as manifested in people means that we have a lot of work to do in the Caribbean, whereby for the most part we are the majority in the varying different nations that of which we are a part. Yeah. And so I see you reaching out to me and this connection as fulfilling, yeah, some of that in some small ways. And so love to you, my brother. And long may these conversations continue. Finally, I'm considering whether and when to run this presentation, Kim Moyo and African sovereignty on Shakara Speaks. But
Shakara speaks.
yeah,
Yep.
but when it go on, just subscribe and you'll get the notification.
Yeah, man. Well, the family should subscribe to Shakara Speaks. I mean, I have been taking in and digesting some of the brothers' work. I mean, no matter how much videos, I even know when I go. Because time is so kind of with them days with the youths about the place and even work in. But I
Love
give
to
thanks for
have
your
you.
bill, my brother.
Yes, sir.
Them thing always on YouTube
Oh,
and
sorry, let me big up your family as well, bro, because I understand that that's part of the reason why we was late today.
true,
You know,
man.
so, yeah. So it's all love, Them for sure all kind of love and blessings upon the eye, So we give thanks for your family and send them our love and our blessings as well. So finally, 10 Mwadi, be thankful unto the
Then
mother,
like,
father,
wow,
Christ, thankful to the universe. I'll be before African liberation for all African people.
peace, love, and power, my brother. So until we link again, we'll have a bill in the near future, my brother. Peace and love to the UK family and even your immediate family.
Blessings.
Uncle Maat, peace and love. So, yeah, the family. So there you have it. We just have another part 2 of understanding spirit and soul, or is this all spookism? I mean, from what Imhotep gave in part 1 and even what Shakara is giving in part 2. I mean, how could you still, so know the difference, family, and know it's all about even liberating ourselves completely. As the brother said, the complete liberation of African people cannot be done without African culture. And even within African culture itself entails the placeholder term, which we call African spirituality, or more properly, Kimoyo. Having said that, family, peace, love, don't forget that coconut oil. Straight.